that we are streaming. I'm just not seeing it on our main website. So if you could just bear with me one moment while we just check that I'm not talking to myself. There we go. Okay, I'm all good. Okay, panic over. We're all good. Got the thumbs up from Paige. So yes, we are going to be looking at Coma Berenices, or Berenices as I said, but we are having some weather. So I've had a bit of a struggle with this evening. One, we have the moon. It's going to be a full moon. So that's happening on Wednesday. So when I looked at what we could look at this evening, most of the sort of winter constellations that we've been working our way through were going to be, we were unable to see them in Canary, any of the Canaries. And then in Chile, we had sort of a similar problem with the moon, and I was trying to find a constellation that we could see in both. That's normally what I try and do. So if we have bad weather in Canary Islands, we'll still see something in Chile and vice versa. But because of this moon factor, I could not find any constellation that we could see at this time for the next hour in both. So I took a gamble and went with Canary, the Canary telescopes, and picked Coma Berenices so we could see there. And there's so much in its sort of deep sky objects I thought would be better seen through like Canary 3 and Canary 1. But of course, here we are, and it's cloudy in the Canary Islands, and it's fine in Chile. So if you are with me on the Space Situation Room, obviously you can just listen and have a look at what other people are looking at in Chile. Otherwise, I'm going to be sharing here on the main page some images from our members that they've taken of Coma Berenices over the years, and also some other images to sort of tie in with the stories that I'm going to be sharing tonight. But hopefully, this will sort of whet your appetite so you can come along and book submissions. And what I've done is I've put in the discussion board under, I think it's the most recent one at the moment. It says about Coma Berenices. I've just put up within that a suggested mission itinerary, I guess, schedule. If you want to start exploring Coma Berenices. So because it's not in our Slew 500, none of the objects I mentioned are the Black Eye Galaxies, I beg your pardon. I've put in what their coordinates would be, and it's very easy if that sounds complex. If you're new to booking a telescope, it's not complex at all. When you reserve a telescope, you'll pick your telescope. Canary 2 is fine for all of them, and then you're offered to pick your object by Slew 500, which you wouldn't do. You'd pick by category, and I've sort of clearly put in which category you'd look for, whether it's Messier, Colander, or SAO is the other one I used. And if you were just with us earlier, Paul Cox was explaining how we reserve telescopes, and he's on every Sunday talking about sort of practical astronomy, how we use Slew. So if you are new to Slew and this all sounds a bit Greek to you, pun not intended, then tune in to Paul on Sunday evenings. He talks everyone through what to do. But otherwise, check out the discussion board, and it will have some objects that we were going to see tonight, but sadly we're not going to because of the weather. But first, before we get started, I wanted to show you where Coma Berenices is. So if you're on the main page, I'm going to just be using some visuals tonight instead of being able to scroll through the telescopes. If you are new, by the way, I just want to let you know what normally happens on these Sunday nights is that we look through Slew's telescopes at some of these objects while we're talking through stories, and it's really lovely, but obviously we're dependent on weather and the moon. So here we go. here is, I wanted to give you this view. It's a very basic constellation chart, to be honest, but the reason I chose this one is because you can see some of the constellations we've been looking at already over these Sundays. So you'll see Gemini, we looked at Cancer last week. I was hoping we'd look at Canis Minor this week, but as I say, it was blown out by the moon. But you'll see Leo, Hydra, and then that sort of looks like a mace spray or something is Coma Berenices. That's where it is. So if you are out looking at the sky, you can use Leo to guide you. Boötes you could use to guide you as well. And then I'll just show you this other image. Here we go. It's just above. So you can, this is sort of a bit more realistic, but you can see that Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, is a guide also for this constellation. So most of us are familiar with the Big Dipper, as you can find your way to Coma Berenices. And if you look, it seems to be predominantly Coma Berenices, this kind of right angle constellation. So we have sort of, from the bottom to the middle and then over to the right would be the three main stars of this constellation. There are many stars and we'll talk about that. But first we're going to talk about these three main stars to sort of just get you oriented. I'm going to see if I've got just a better one. Okay, that might be a little bit better. So you can hopefully see the right angle in this picture as well, where we've got the Alpha star at the bottom, and a straight line up takes you to the Beta star, and then a horizontal line across takes you to the Gamma star. That would be the right angle. And then the other stars are sort of coming down here, and that's a star cluster, and we're going to talk about that before we get started on our story, just so you really get to sort of grips of what this star group looks like, what this constellation looks like, so you can sort of have it in your mind as we start to talk a bit more about it. There's a bit of a clue on this page. It's Berenice's hair. That's what Coma Berenices means, the hair of Berenice. And I just wanted to flag up, I'm using this picture from Stephen James O'Meara's book, Observing the Night Sky with Binoculars. These are actually naked. You can see these stars with the naked eye, and with a good pair of binoculars you can see a lot more detail, but I just wanted to flag up as I'm thieving his image. So it's a great book, I recommend it. Stephen James O'Meara's Observing the Night Sky with Binoculars. So a bit about these stars. Let's have a look. That's where I find I got rid of it. Okay, right. So the Alpha star at the bottom, it's called Diadem, and that's the other name for it. And diadem means like crown or jewel, and this might make sense a bit later as we tell the story. Or sometimes it was known as the braid. And it's about 58 light years away, and it's two stars, and they orbit each other about every 25 years. And the distance between these double stars, this binary star system, is like the equivalent of between the Sun and Saturn. It's phenomenal, and we sort of see it as we think of it as one star, but actually it's these two stars with vast distances between them, and it's like a bluish kind of color. Then moving sort of directly upwards, we have the Beta star, and that's about 29 light years from Earth. It's the brightest, even though it's the Beta, as we're often finding, it is actually the brightest star. It's a dwarf star. It's about 3 billion years old. And then moving across in our right angle over to the Gamma star, this is it's about 167 light years away. Again, really old, 2.7 billion years. And it's orange hued. It's a K-type star, which is like orange in color and slightly cooler than the Sun. It's very similar to the Sun, this star. And it's not part of this cluster under it, although it certainly looks like it. So this cluster is known as, and this is, so bear with me, this is where this whole constellation kind of gets its name, is from this cluster. This cluster is called Meloit 111. You can also book a mission with Slooh's telescopes. It's Colander 256 as well as its other name. And it contains about 50 stars spread over like 6 degrees of apparent sky. And it's about 280 light years away. And it's the second nearest open cluster to the Earth after the Hyades in Taurus, which we looked at several weeks ago, if you remember. And it's really best seen, we're a bit early. It's just, I was waiting to do this one in March, but this is the way it happens. It's really best seen if you're where I am, in the northern hemisphere. I'm in the northeast about March, but you can see it. And these stars are young. They're only about 500 million years old. So this is kind of where our story begins. So I just wanted to read you something, a description of this open star cluster. And this was by a gentleman called G.P. Service. He writes, "Curious twinkling, as if gossamers spangled with dewdrops were entangled there. One might think the old woman of the nursery rhyme who went to sweep the cobwebs out of the sky had skipped this corner, or else that its delicate beauty had preserved it even from her housewifely instincts." And I love this because when you hear the story of who this constellation was named after, there is no whimsy in this story, and there's certainly no way that Queen Berenice II would have wanted anything to do with the description of being housewifely. So it's just so lovely that we see these stars as these lovely, delicate, twinkly things, although it's sort of much more violent things happening out there, but in particular, the story doesn't match at all. So who was Queen Berenice II, whose hair this supposedly is in the sky? And we're going to have some pictures later, but I kind of want to keep you in suspense because I kind of want you to sort of imagine something like, what does her hair look like as we're talking? But to give you some idea, I didn't want to leave you without an image as we talk about Queen Berenice. Here she is on a coin. Yep, she really existed. Because, and sort of interesting, this constellation she's the only modern historical figure to have a constellation named after her. So pretty phenomenal. Excuse me, just grabbing some water. So the story starts in a place called Cyrene in Cyrenaica. So Cyrenaica was the sort of the country at the time, and that's sort of where modern day Libya is. Before Berenice II's birth, and she was born in 266 BCE, we're actually going to begin with Berenice I in this story, her grandmother. But first, let's kind of set the scene. So Cyrenaica has had many rulers at this point. The Egyptians were there, we know that, and then it became colonized by the seafaring Greeks. And it was this very sort of, it sounds like a wonderful, like mythical place. It had something called, it was known for silphium that grew there. That's, I've sort of heard described as a bit like parsley, but it was an aphrodisiac and also a medicinal cure. And it was said to be like a wonder herb and a panacea for all kinds of ailments, including, and this is from Pliny the Elder, including growths of the anus, where he recommends repeated fumigations with the root, and also bites of feral dog. But it had many, many uses, was very sort of sought after. But in addition to this wonder herb, there in Cyrenaica, it's very sort of agricultural place, all sorts of things growing, sort of very rich and abundant, and it becomes known also as Pentapolis, which means the 5 cities, Cyrene being one of them. And not only is it sort of this wonderful, plentiful place, it's seen as like the intellectual and artistic center for a lot of Greeks who came there. It's famous for its school of medicine, it's famous for its architecture, and you can sort of imagine it was like a very thought of as very sort of civilized society, and even like the people there were described as having like a deep sense of morality, but also a real joy and appreciation for life. They sort of managed to marry the two of not being like completely debauched and enjoying themselves, but this moral joyfulness with life. But then, as things happened, Cyrenaica falls to the Persians. But not for long, because then along comes Alexander the Great, and he defeats the Persians. And when he dies suddenly, his lands are divided among his generals, his loyal generals. So Ptolemy I takes Egypt, and Philip and his wife Berenice I, they get Cyrenaica. And so here they are, Philip and Berenice I, and they have a son, Magus, who will become king of Cyrenaica. Only Philip dies, and Berenice I marries Ptolemy. So it brings Cyrenaica back under Egyptian rule, under Ptolemy I. And Berenice I then has a second son, Ptolemy II, sort of beginning what will be centuries-long dynasty, the Ptolemaic dynasty. In fact, it goes all the way up to Ptolemy XV. Cleopatra's part of that dynasty, and there are many, many Cleopatras as well. Many Ptolemies and many Cleopatras. And when Ptolemy I dies, Magus, the son, decides that he would like Cyrenaica back and leave Egypt to Ptolemy II. So he says to his half-brother, you take Egypt, I'll have Cyrenaica over there, and that will be lovely. But it doesn't quite work out that way, because Ptolemy II wants both. So the two brothers engage in many sort of underhanded dealings, and eventually Magus does get Cyrenaica, and he marries Queen Apamea II from Syria, and they give birth to only one child, and that is Berenice II, who we're looking at now. But the situation between the half-brothers just decays, and war ensues, and Magus, who has these Buddhist leanings in his travels, he's been to India and studied Buddhism, and he's something of a philosopher, and he's not much of a fighter, and he is defeated by Ptolemy II, and so he has to strike a deal. And the deal is he can keep Cyrenaica as independent, but his daughter, Berenice II, has to marry Ptolemy III, Ptolemy II's son. So, because Ptolemy II wants to keep Cyrenaica in the family, in the Ptolemaic dynasty, which he probably doesn't know is going to happen yet, but it is. So, Magus and his wife have Berenice II, Apamea II, his wife, have Berenice II, and there they are in Cyrenaica, and over in Egypt is Ptolemy II with his son Ptolemy III. But what happens is this whole sort of truce and deal doesn't last long, because King Magus dies, and his queen Apamea II has a lot of power, and she's very liked, and she's also very shrewd. She doesn't want anything to do with the Ptolemaic dynasty, because she realizes that she'll lose Cyrenaica effectively, and she's sort of drawn, she's more from like Macedonian roots herself, so she kind of wants it kept in sort of Macedonian Greek family, if you will. So she's a bit underhanded, and what she does is she marries off Berenice II, her daughter, to a gentleman called Demetrius the Fair, who's a handsome Macedonian prince. In this case, Demetrius the Fair, it's not fair because of his judgment, he was just incredibly pretty. So Berenice II is betrothed to Ptolemy III over in Egypt, but instead her mother marries her off to this handsome man. But the problem is, and rather awkwardly, Queen Apamea starts an affair with Demetrius. And this is where clues of Berenice II's nature begin in our story, and where we'll begin to understand that whimsy and housewifery don't apply to this woman. Because the story goes that one night, while her handsome husband is laying with her mother, Berenice II has assassins come in and kill Demetrius, while he's with Apama in her bedroom. And some say she even stood at the door and looked on, instructing the hired assassins not to hurt her mother while her mother attempts to protect her lover. So you see, what we haven't mentioned about Berenice II is that she is not a meek-mannered woman, nor is she fragile. And as I said, she's certainly not the housewife type. She's an absolute warrior. When her father, King Magus, was failing in battle, it is Berenice that mounts a horse, rallies remaining forces, kills many of the enemy, and drives the rest into retreat. So she doesn't win, but she basically leads the battle on horseback. And she's won on horseback in the games at Olympia several times, in the Nemean games, where people show their strength to Zeus as well by running in armour in the stadium and wrestling and throwing the discus and boxing and spear throwing. Berenice II wins in the chariot races, earning her possibly a wreath of olive branches or green celery, as it later became. And what this fierce woman wants, now that her pretty husband's out of the way, is her original betrothed, Ptolemy III. And so she marries him and becomes Queen of Egypt, bringing Cyrenaica back under its rule. And that is where this coin comes from. It was once she married Ptolemy III. And if you're wondering what Ptolemy III looked like, boom, there he is. Maybe not as pretty as Demetrius the Fair. But while he may not have been as handsome, he certainly was ambitious. And often went off to fight in the Syrian wars. And he was also fair, so it said. It was said that the Ptolemaic kingdom actually reached the height of its power during his reign with Berenice, which is amazing given they were like, this was the peak and he's only the third in. It all goes downhill after him. But the sort of stories about how there's a big flood and the crops are ruined, and King Ptolemy III uses his own money to import grain so he can feed his peoples. Also, another story is that he's very keen on this huge library, the Great Library it's called, that's being built in Alexandria, and he wants to make sure that works of knowledge are shared with everybody. So he finds out where all the original works of great sort of astronomers, mathematicians and philosophers are, and he basically pays these people to, as a deposit, to borrow these texts. And he says, I'll copy them and I'll put them in the Great Library. Well, he doesn't. He copies them, puts the originals in the Great Library, gives up on his deposits and just hands the copies back to the owners. So a real sort of sense of purpose from Ptolemy III. And Queen Berenice is also said to have this sort of real sense of fairness and progressiveness and liberalism. And together they're very open to people having their own religions, because, there are a lot of Egyptian cults. And they didn't impose any religion on their people, which is kind of novel for kings and queens in that age. Excuse me. So he and Berenice, this couple are really loved, and they also seem to be a couple deeply in love. Ptolemy III often remarks on the beautiful long tresses of his wife and how special they are and how beautiful she is. And we can only assume that Berenice feels just as passionately about her husband because, and here we get to our constellation, because the legend has it that he goes off to fight in Syria for the third time, and she cuts off all of her hair and places it in the Temple of Aphrodite as an offering because she wants her husband back soon and safe. So you can just imagine this sort of very dramatic event happening where, these luscious locks that are so revered by the nation, and here she is, you can also see them on this coin, and her husband loves them, and she sort of makes this huge gesture and has them all lopped off and places them in this temple. And it seems to work because Ptolemy III comes back and he's safe and sound. And he's horrified that his wife has no hair. But he's very touched by her offering. So they go to the temple to get her long tresses back. Sort of this war trophy almost, only that her hair is no longer there. It's gone from where she placed it in the temple. And this does not go down well at all, because obviously someone's stolen the queen's hair. And someone's head has to roll. And we might be a bit pre-beheading at this time, but certainly someone's going to get their throat slit. And it's probably going to be a bunch of the priests in the temple. So while the court are gathered to ponder which priests are going to die, astronomer and mathematician Conan of Samos thinks very quickly on his feet and explains the phenomenon by saying that the hair of the wonderful Queen Berenices has been carried into the heavens and placed among the stars. And if we all would just wait until tonight, he says, we will be able to see the Coma Berenices in the sky. And so this is absolutely true. This is how this constellation got its name. And when I sort of showed you earlier, let's just pop back to this. Here we go. The Coma star cluster, it's called. It sort of takes up most of this particular constellation. You can kind of see that, yeah, okay, maybe it's like hair coming down, sort of her long tresses. And so they live happily ever after, this pair. Well, until Ptolemy III dies, and Ptolemy IV, their son, decides he doesn't want his mother around anymore, thank you very much, and he poisons her. And so I think it's clear to see that the Ptolemaic dynasty had indeed peaked with Ptolemy III and Queen Berenices. Their son was not so generous. But I personally think that more credit in this story needs to go to Conan of Samos, the astronomer, because it seems like he had such a good knowledge of the constellations that he knew that this particular group of stars was not really going to be missed much by anyone. And he kind of knew that it had just the qualities that may work convincingly to be hair. So he really sort of thinks on his feet here. But before we go on, I just wanted you to sort of have a think about what colour you think Queen Berenice's hair would have been. So just bear that in mind. But the reason he was so smart was because what he did, and this is, you know, probably just, I wouldn't say it's conjecture, I'd say that it seems like what he did, this clever astronomer, was actually take the tail of Leo. The tufts of hair that are at the tail of Leo, he thought, you know what, we'll just get rid of Leo's tail, and we'll say that this tufts of hair are in fact Queen Berenice's hair. So I just wanted to show you what depiction of this hair looks like. Ta-da! There it is, the flying hair. But what makes me laugh about this, and this is from Urania's Mirror, which is like this wonderful 1800s set of cards of constellations that we're probably very familiar with, because we can actually use these images without copyright problems. So a lot of people use these images from this card set. But what I laugh about with this hair is that when I was thinking of Queen Berenice's story and how fierce she was, in my mind, all I could think about was like, wow, she must have been a redhead. That was all I could think about. And in this particular depiction, this colour of her hair is almost red. And some say she had amber hair, which is kind of, I'm not sure how true that is, because given where she was from, one would imagine she had much darker hair. So I don't know. But this kind of made me laugh. So this is what it looks like. But actually, if you go back to our first, both of these, you could see that, yeah, look, Leo's had his tail lopped off. and that quite possibly this Coma Berenices was actually the tail of Leo, the tufts, which ties up more because, you know, lions have goldenish manes, so maybe people said, oh look, yeah, look, there's her golden hair, or maybe she did have golden hair. I don't know. We don't know. We have the coin and a couple of sculptures from later on, but the coin really is the only clue we have, and we don't know. But the other possibility, maybe he was Conon of Samos was thinking of this too, was that Virgo, so if you just take a look where Virgo is under Coma Berenices, apparently Virgo, the Virgin, used to be holding in some depictions, in the Dendera zodiac, for example, she's holding a distaff, which is like an instrument used for the spinning of like flax. And it would, you know, that would kind of tie in as well, that this would have looked kind of like wispy parts from the spinning, whatever was being spun. And perhaps this sort of stick that we can see here in the lower, the lower picture we're looking at would have been this instrument. So Virgo just you know, got rid of that, and it stuck. And even to the point where you know, people weren't really entirely sure, but Tycho Brahe in 1600 said, no, this is Coma Berenices, and that was it, and it's been named that ever since. So it kind of lost all association with Leo and with Virgo. Another theory was that it belonged to it was someone called Ariadne's hair. Now Ariadne was a spinner and a weaver as well, so there's definitely a sort of a theme around the sort of wispiness that people get when they look up at this particular constellation, probably because of the open cluster Meloit 111. And then I just want to sort of carry on, but sorry, Burnham mentions that in various star maps of the late Middle Ages, it was also identified as a rose wreath or an ivy wreath, which is interesting because you think about the wreath that maybe Queen Berenice would have had from all of the games that she won, you know, her olive wreath or a celery leaf wreath. So possibly that stayed on somewhere through history, I don't know, through stories and poems. There are a lot of poetry and stories written about Queen Berenice because she was sort of seen as, it was such a romantic tale, you know, lopping off all her hair. So there was a lot of art as well in the 16th century, the 17th century of Queen Berenice II. And even today you'll find some fairly recent poems written about her. So yeah, Burnham says, as I mentioned, that Tycho Brahe set the question at rest in 1602 by cataloguing it separately and adopting this title, Coma Berenices. So fantastic. But one of the most wonderful things I think about this constellation is that it is full of these deep sky objects. And certainly Conon of Samos didn't know that at the time. But it's like her hair are literally just like, her hair is full of galaxies. It's unbelievable. And we're going to take a look now at some of the images of deep sky objects that are within this constellation. But by the by, before we start, I wanted to let you know that actually there's a dwarf planet in this constellation. Now, obviously, planets move, so it's not going to be in this constellation forever. But at the moment, Makemake, which was discovered in 2005, can be seen in this particular constellation. It has a 310-year orbit of the Sun. And I'm sharing all this because Emmanuel C., one of our members, very kindly shared this information with me, and he took a couple of pictures using Slooh's telescopes of this dwarf planet and tracked some of its movement through this constellation. And I couldn't share it with you for some reason on because of the technology, but if you have a look on, again, in discussions around the Coma Berenices, there's two threads. you'll see a link that Emmanuel's really kindly posted, and you can click on and you can see the movement. It's really awesome. So that is up there. And Maki Maki, by the way, is named after the god of fertility in the Rapa Nui mythology. Now, the Rapa Nui you may or may not know, but they were they lived on Easter Island in the southwestern Pacific Ocean, and Maki Maki was the chief god, like the creator of humanity. So all the dwarf planets are named after like these creators. So Maki Maki happens to be in Coma Berenices at the moment. But some other things that I had booked for us to see, and again are on this itinerary or agenda, whatever you want to call it, schedule of suggested missions that are also in the discussion board. One is the globular cluster M53. So let me just pop these off. So here we go. It's so beautiful. This was actually taken by one of our members, Mario R. I just love it. It's just, I mean, what if you think of the word glob, globular cluster, this to me is like the epitome. So it's also known as NGC 5024, and it was discovered by Johann Elert Bode in 1775, and it's 60,000 light years away from the galactic center, and most of the stars in this are older than our sun. And I hate to do this, but I'm going to bring up a color version that was done by NASA. So you can like really start to see the density there of this globular cluster. It's just phenomenal. And I hate to put our Slew photographs next to like things taken with Hubble, because often people sort of get disappointed, perhaps if they look through the telescope. You don't. The minute you've seen it with your own eyes and you booked a mission yourself, it's not disappointing at all. It's unbelievable. But I know that in some of the shows we've done, people have, sort of said, I can't believe that we didn't see, I can't believe, that's not an asteroid. It's just like we have like a dot we're tracking in the sky. You can see a line. It's amazing to us, but for some reason they're expecting you to be up close to this asteroid as if like you're in a movie and some CGI view. So it's just funny, and we're going to use a couple of pictures from Hubble later just to really, because some of these galaxies we're going to look at are so far away that we can capture them in our telescopes, but it's a whole different ballgame when you're dealing with Hubble. So this is the Messier 53, the globular cluster. It's actually near Diadem, the Alpha star. So definitely book a mission to that if you can. It's also it's near another globular cluster which I've put as a suggestion also. I think it was 5053, I can't remember off the top of my head, but in that schedule I've suggested that too. And then up next we have the Black Eye Galaxy. Just so beautiful, and again this is really thanks to Mario for sharing these pictures with me tonight. I was struggling what to do given the Canary Islands are getting some weather and some moon, but he very kindly shared this, and this was taken with Canary too, and isn't it fantastic? It's such an amazing image. I'm not even going to use another image. This is just absolutely perfect. So it's a spiral galaxy, as you can see, and it's about 24 million light years away. And it's really popular with amateur astronomers because it's visible even in small telescopes, as you can see now. I mean, ours isn't a small telescope, but if you have a small telescope at home, you'd even be able to make it out. And again, it's near Diadem. It's near the Alpha star, not that near, but it's in that region. And this is thought like, this is like 100 billion stars in there. And it's actually in the Virgo cluster. So we're going to talk about this in a moment, but there's the Coma Cluster of galaxies, not to be confused with the Coma Star Cluster, which we saw in the hair. There's the Coma Cluster of galaxies, and it sort of bumps up against the Virgo galaxy cluster, and so sometimes it's called the Coma Virgo cluster. But this one is actually said to be in the Virgo cluster, but it is in the constellation Coma Berenices. I'm not sure if we have. I was thinking about having a picture that showed where this was. Let me just see if it was this one. Nope, this one. No, it doesn't show it, but you can see M53 I just mentioned is there down by Diadem, the Alpha. That was the globular cluster, and the Black Eye Galaxy is just slightly to the right of that. And if you're wondering what NGP is, by the way, that's the north pole of our galaxy. So the northern galactic pole is in this constellation, which is pretty amazing as well. Okay, so that's the Black Eye Galaxy. Which is beautiful, and another fantastic galaxy that this one is also very well known for, this constellation, is the Needle Galaxy. So this is a Hubble picture, so you can really sort of get up close with it, and it's kind of one of the most famous examples really of an edge-on spiral galaxy. So it's all oriented like perpendicularly to our line of sight, so we can sort of see straight into this luminous disk. It's sort of obviously named the Needle Galaxy because when you see it in full, it looks like just a real narrow streak across the sky. And you can certainly see it through Canary too, if you book to that. And it's only about 40 million light years away, so it's relatively close. And it's because it's sort of seen as edge-on, it's really useful object for like comparative study, and it's a whopper of a galaxy. It's about a third larger than the Milky Way, and spans about 100,000 light years. So yeah, thank you Josh Barrington for this beautiful picture using Hubble's telescope. It's the largest edge-on spiral galaxy in the night sky, in fact. And then finally, what we're really culminating in here is the Coma Cluster of galaxies that I've been talking about. But before we do that, I just kind of want to flag up this. Again, this is from Mario, wonderful. Different galaxy, this is M100. But I wanted to pull this up because just in this picture alone, this is again taken with Canary too. This is not in the Coma Cluster. But you can see, even with this galaxy in the middle, you can probably count another 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 blurry galaxies in this picture. So just to really give you a sense of how full of galaxies this constellation is. That's just, and this is just a small fraction of it. And then here is the whopper. Wow. Okay, so this was taken obviously with Hubble, and this is the Coma Galaxy Cluster. So you can see, I mean, it's just stuffed with galaxies. I mean, I don't even just take a quick glimpse around here. We're looking like at least 30, and then I can't zoom in. Well, I could zoom in, I guess, but you can look for this picture on Hubble. On NASA's website. There's plenty of pictures on the Coma Galaxy Cluster, and just zoom in and see just how many. So it's also known as Able 1656, and it contains over 1,000 identified galaxies. Those are just the ones that are identified. 1,000 galaxies. So it's just so beautiful. This constellation that the sky was like, oh shit, what am I going to do? These priests are going to get their heads chopped off. Oh look, we'll give her the tuft of the lion as tail. Little did he know that this is just so rich in galaxies. It's about 321 million light years away, and it's the central region is dominated by these two giant elliptical galaxies. That's NGC 4874 and NGC 4889. And I think I put them down in the suggested mission schedule to visit. because obviously, you know, you're going to be able to more chance of seeing these really bright ones through our telescopes. And NGC 4874 is 10 times larger than the Milky Way. Can you believe it? And it's so big that it has dwarf galaxies under its gravitational influence. It's just, I mean, it's just unbelievable how many galaxies are in this. And it's an astronomer's dream, this constellation. You get yourself behind a bigger telescope, you get your hands on something like, you know, we've got at Slew, and you just can really go to town on looking at galaxies. The entire cluster is more than 20 million light years in diameter. More than 20 million light years in diameter. And it's nearly spherical in shape. And as we said, contains just thousands and thousands of galaxies. So because I sort of just showed you that in Coma Berenices is the galactic North Pole, and because of that positioning, it means that the Coma Cluster is in an area that's not obscured by dust and gas from the plane of the Milky Way, so it's really easily visible to observers here. So that's why also it gets a lot of traction. If you're a professional, not professional, but if you're if you're an astronomer, you will definitely know about this constellation, whereas, you know, maybe if you know, you're just like me, man on the street, you wouldn't have even heard of it. But if you're an astronomer, you know about it. So just to put this into some kind of perspective, you know, it's like more than 1,000 galaxies, 1,000 identified galaxies in this cluster of galaxies. And our galaxy, our one Milky Way galaxy, contains at least 100 billion planets and 200 to 400 billion stars. And this contains more than 1,000, maybe thousands of those, of galaxies. So unbelievable, just unbelievable. And to kind of wrap this up, back to our Queen Berenices, what really kind of strikes me when I think about this constellation is that it sort of shows to me like this paradox that we have of, here we are, or here she is, this individual on a planet in a tiny part of the world, doing her thing, fighting battles, killing people, getting poisoned herself, and doing what she thinks is, you know, I'm assuming she did for the good of the people, and she sort of tried to live a life that was right, although kind of violent. But and then this much larger perspective of us just being so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. You know, when you start to look, whenever astronomy does this, it sort of puts things in so much perspective. So how do you live in these two, in the paradox? You know, otherwise, if we just constantly said, well, we're so insignificant, we wouldn't get up and do things for our society, we wouldn't try and help. You know, what would be the point? We're so insignificant. So it's sort of marrying that with this sort of carrying on our individual lives, and sort of realizing that yes, things are relatively important, but in the perspective of something much larger. So it's almost like, for me, this constellation is really one of humility, which you wouldn't think, because there it is, this queen's golden hair up in the sky, and with this jewel or wreath on, but to me it just drives home this conflict that's always happening with sort of the minutiae of what's happening on Earth with the vastness of space. So I kind of just wanted to end by reading what captures this sentiment most. Is Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot, obviously named after the book. That's taken from his 1994 book of that name. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it. And it says, "The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatred. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. And this point of pale light, if you remember, he's talking about capturing Earth from a very, very long way away, and it just looks like a speck of dust. And as Sagan sort of says, to him it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish this pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. So that's it from me this evening. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you had a good time, even in spite of us not seeing anything live through our telescopes this evening. I just wanted to point out a couple of events we've got coming up. One, if you're really interested in these galaxies, then do check out Dr. Paige Godfrey's Intro to Astronomy this Wednesday, because she's going to be talking about different types of galaxies, you know, like the spiral, all the different galaxies, and going into galaxies. You know, last week she talked about the Milky Way, so well worth checking her out on Wednesday evening. Paul Cox is back, he's well again, so thank goodness, and you can find him on Sunday talking about Intro to practical astronomy. So we'll be talking, as I mentioned earlier, about how to book missions to some of the places we've mentioned today, or how to navigate yourself around Slew so you can find out more information, or piggyback on missions. If you're not an apprentice, you can still see things that we're looking at through our telescopes. You just can't book missions, but we all try and book through Slew, and I know I try and book some so that people can just sort of jump on a mission and see some of these objects. And on that note, I'm booking for the Winter Circle. So the Winter Circle is a collection of stars that you see in winter in the Northern Hemisphere. And we've seen a few of them together on these constellation stories, but we've still got a couple to go, like Procyon and Sirius. So I booked a mission to Sirius last week, but I'll book to Procyon and Sirius over this week as well. And I'll put that in a discussion thread called the Winter Circle on discussion board if you wanted to piggyback on any of those missions and take some pictures. Otherwise, our big event of the week, if you have missed it, is the lunar eclipse, and that's on Wednesday morning early if you're in the northeast, even earlier if you're in the out west. But you'd have to get up early to see it in the States, like super early. It's not really visible in some parts of the States, but you will see it elsewhere in the world, and we will have our telescopes pointed towards it. So it's a lunar eclipse. It's a super moon. It's a blue moon, because we already had one this month, and it's a wolf moon, but there are many other names for this moon too. So I'll be on, Paul will be on that, Paige Godfrey will be on that, as will Bob Berman. So we'll be up bright and early Wednesday morning to talk about that and give you some great views through the telescope, so you can see the lunar eclipse even if you can't see it outside. So make sure you join us for that. Otherwise, I'm back next week, same time. I gather it's the Super Bowl, so I don't know what chances are of you joining me, but I will be here. If it's not going well for your team, I'll be here. You can come and console yourself with some stories. Again, I haven't decided what we're going to do. I've got to have a look, because we'll see how the moon plays out next week, and what we can do around that. So good night from me. Thanks again for joining me, and I wish you clear skies. Definitely get out there and see if you can see Queen Berenice's hair fluttering in the sky above. Okay.